They bulldozed my ugly shed. 48 hours later, 438 homes had no water. I stood there and watched them tear it down. No arguments, no shouting, just wood snapping, metal folding, and people laughing like it was overdue. They thought it was just an ugly shed. I knew it wasn't, and I knew exactly what would happen next. 2 days later, 438 homes turned on their taps and got nothing. If you've ever seen someone push too far without knowing the truth, stay with me. And if you want more stories like this, go ahead and subscribe. The bulldozer showed up before the sun had fully burned through the morning haze, its engine already growling like it had somewhere better to be. I heard it from the back porch while I was finishing my first cup of coffee. That low, mechanical rumble cutting through the quiet like it didn't belong here. Out past the fence line, dust lifted in slow curls as the machine rolled down the gravel edge of my property, followed by a white SUV I recognized before it even stopped. Denise Halbrook stepped out first, sunglasses on, clipboard in hand, moving like she owned every acre she could see. Behind her, a handful of neighbors gathered along the fence, some leaning on posts, others standing with their phones already out. A couple of them laughed when the bulldozer idled near the shed, like this was some kind of weekend show. To them, it probably was. Just another HOA cleanup. Another problem getting fixed. I set my cup down and walked out toward them, boots grinding against gravel, steady, unhurried. No one looked at me right away. Their attention was on the machine, on Denise, on the idea that something ugly was about to disappear. That shed had been there longer than any of them. Old wood, gray from years of sun, roofline just a little crooked where my father never bothered to fix it. From the outside, it looked like nothing worth saving. That was the point. Denise turned when she heard me coming. She gave me that same tight smile she'd used every time she sent one of those violation notices. "Mr. Walker," she said, like she was checking off a box, "we're proceeding with the removal today. You've had more than enough time to comply." I stopped a few feet from her, close enough to hear the pen tapping lightly against her clipboard. "You sure about that?" I asked. She didn't even hesitate. "Absolutely." The board voted. "This structure is in clear violation of HOA standards. It's an eyesore, and it's affecting property values." Behind her, someone chuckled. Another voice muttered something about finally cleaning this place up. I looked past her at the shed, same as it had been yesterday, same as it had been for 30 years. "You might want to check what it's connected to," I said. The foreman standing near the bulldozer glanced at Denise, waiting. He looked like the only one there who wasn't enjoying this. Denise didn't even turn her head. "We've heard every excuse there is, Mr. Walker. Storage, sentimental value, tools, family history. It doesn't matter. The structure has to go. It's not about that." She finally sighed, like I was wasting her time. "Then what is it about?" I held her gaze for a second, long enough that she should have noticed something wasn't right. "You'll find out," I said. That was all. The foreman shifted his weight. "Ma'am?" Denise made a small motion with her pen. "Proceed." The engine roared louder as the bulldozer lurched forward. Metal met wood with a dull, cracking sound that carried across the fence line. The front wall of the shed folded inward almost instantly, splintering like it had never stood a chance. A few people clapped. One of them actually cheered. I didn't move. The blade pushed deeper, tearing through the frame, collapsing the roof in a slow crunch of tin and timber. Dust rose up, thick and dry, catching the sunlight in a way that made the whole thing look almost unreal, like something staged. Inside, I knew exactly what was happening with every inch the machine advanced, what it was hitting, what it was crushing. But I said nothing. Denise walked along the edge of the fence, talking to a couple of residents, nodding as they thanked her. I caught pieces of it. Long overdue. Property values. About time someone did something. No one asked what the shed was for. No one asked why I wasn't trying to stop them. The bulldozer's blade dropped again, and there was a sharper sound this time. Metal bending. Something internal giving way under pressure. The foreman frowned slightly, but kept going. I watched it all the way through. Every beam, every panel, every piece of something my father had built with his own hands, reduced to a flattened pile of debris in less than 20 minutes. When it was over, the machine backed off, engine idling as the dust slowly settled. What was left didn't look like much, just broken boards, twisted tin, and dirt churned up where the foundation used to sit. Denise turned back toward me, brushing her hands together like the job was finished. "There," she said. "Much better." I didn't answer. I stepped past her, over the edge of the debris, boots sinking slightly into the loose dirt. The crowd quieted a little as I walked into what used to be the shed. Not out of respect, just curiosity. I crouched near what had been the doorway and brushed aside a section of splintered wood. Beneath it, half buried in dust and gravel, was a small metal box, dented but intact. I pulled it free, wiped it off with the sleeve of my shirt, and opened it. Inside was the key. Brass. Worn smooth from years of use. Still exactly where I'd left it. I closed the box, slipped the key into my pocket, and stood back up. When I turned, a few of them were watching me more closely now. Not laughing anymore. Just wondering. Denise tilted her head slightly. "Looking for something?" I met her eyes. "Found it," I said. Then I walked past her without another word, back toward the house, leaving the pile of debris behind me. No one stopped me. No one asked anything else. Behind me, I could hear them talking again, voices low, uncertain now. The foreman said something about clearing the rest later. Someone else asked if there'd be landscaping next. Normal conversations. Like nothing important had just happened. I reached the porch, picked up my coffee, and took a slow sip. It had gone cold, but I drank it anyway, eyes still on the spot where the shed used to stand. They thought they'd cleaned something up. They thought they'd fixed a problem. Out there, under that dirt and broken wood, something had already stopped working. They just didn't know it yet. And for the first time since that bulldozer showed up, I let myself ask the question they hadn't even considered. How long would it take them to notice? I didn't have to guess. I knew exactly how the system behaved when something went wrong. I'd been inside that shed more times than I could count, listening to the steady hum of the pump, watching the pressure gauges hold their line like clockwork. It had never failed. Not once. Because it had never been touched. Until now. I stepped off the porch and walked the back fence line, same route I'd taken every morning for years. Nothing looked different from the outside. The land was still dry, still quiet, still pretending like it didn't depend on anything beneath it. But I could feel it. Not with my hands. Not with my eyes. With absence. That low vibration that used to run through the ground near the shed was gone. No hum, no rhythm, just stillness. I stopped where the shed had been, looking over what was left of it. The debris had settled overnight. Dust clung to everything. Broken boards, twisted metal, fragments of something most people would have called junk. They didn't see the lines running underneath, pipes buried deep, laid out before any of those houses existed. My father had planned it that way. Out of sight, out of mind. Said people respected what they could see and ignored what they couldn't. He wasn't wrong. I crouched and brushed aside a patch of dirt, exposing the edge of a conduit line before covering it again. No point in leaving it visible now. Footsteps crunched behind me. Ethan. I didn't turn right away. I knew the voice. Carl Jennings came up beside the fence, hands hooked into his belt, looking at the flattened ground where the shed used to stand. He'd lived 2 houses down for years, one of the few who didn't treat me like I didn't belong. They really went through with it, he said. Yeah. He shifted his weight, glancing toward the road where the bulldozer tracks were still visible. Denise was pretty set on it. I stood up, dusting my hands off. She usually is. Carl hesitated. You tried to tell her? Twice. He let out a slow breath. Figured. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Just stood there looking at the damage like it might explain itself if we stared long enough. You didn't fight it, he said finally. I looked at him then. Would it have mattered? He didn't answer, because he knew it wouldn't have. The decision had been made before I ever walked into that meeting, before Denise printed those photos, before anyone raised their hand. Carl nodded once like he'd come to the same conclusion. Still, seems like you're taking it pretty calm. I slipped my hands into my pockets, feeling the edge of the brass key against my fingers. Nothing to get worked up about yet, I said. Yet? I didn't respond to that. Carl followed my gaze back to the ground, and I could see it. The moment something shifted in his expression. Not understanding. Not yet. But doubt, Ethan, he said slowly. That shed. It wasn't just storage, was it? I held his eyes for a second. No. He swallowed. Then what was it? I looked past him toward the row of houses stretching across what used to be open land. Fresh paint. Green lawns. Sprinkler systems clicking on every morning like clockwork, all fed by something they'd never questioned. You ever wonder why this place never had water restrictions? I asked. Carl frowned. I figured the county, they're not connected to the county. That landed heavier than I expected. He blinked. What do you mean, not connected? I stepped around him, heading back toward the house. Means what it sounds like. Ethan. I stopped at the porch but didn't turn around. That system ran through that shed, I said. Ran clean. Ran steady. Ran for 30 years without anyone asking how. Carl didn't move. People don't ask questions when things work, I added. They just assume it'll keep working. Silence stretched between us. Then he said it. Quieter this time. And now? I opened the door, pausing just long enough to answer. Now it won't. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me, leaving him out there with that thought. Inside, the house was still the same. Same worn floorboards. Same table where I'd read every notice Denise had sent. Same cabinet where the documents were kept. Deeds, permits, agreements nobody from that HOA had ever bothered to look at. I walked over and opened it, pulling out the folder my father had left me. The paper inside was old but intact. Handwritten sections mixed with formal filings. Signatures that still held weight, whether Denise believed it or not. The well system wasn't just something he built. It was something he protected. Legally. I flipped to the agreement page, running a finger along the clause I'd read more times than I could count. Permanent structure, protected infrastructure, no removal without consent of owner. Clear, simple, binding, and ignored. I closed the folder and set it on the table. Outside, I could hear a car drive by. Someone talking. Life moving on like nothing had changed. But it had. The system was down, Not damaged, not disrupted. Down. And sooner or later, something inside those houses was going to stop working. A faucet, a shower, a hose line, something small. At first, then more. I walked back to the porch and looked out over the land again. Carl was gone now. Probably heading home. Probably thinking about what I said. Good. Because once it started, there wouldn't be any stopping it. No quick fix, no reset. Just consequences. I leaned against the railing, eyes fixed on the neighborhood that had just voted to tear down the one thing keeping it running. They thought they'd removed a problem. They thought they'd improved something. They hadn't even scratched the surface of what they'd done. And when it hit them, when the first sign showed up, I knew exactly what they'd do. They'd look for someone to blame. They just hadn't figured out yet. They'd already found him. It started the next morning, not with panic, not yet. Just another envelope taped to my front door. I pulled it off without rushing, already knowing who it was from before I even opened it. Same letterhead, same clean formatting, same signature at the bottom like it carried more authority than it actually did. Notice of non-compliance. Final action confirmation. I read it once, then folded it and set it on the table next to the others. Denise wasn't done. Even after tearing the shed down, she needed it documented, formalized, filed away like she'd followed procedure from start to finish, like none of it could ever come back on her. A second envelope sat underneath, this one thicker. I opened it slower. Fine assessment, property violation, cost recovery for demolition services, administrative fees, numbers stacked neatly down the page. She was billing me for destroying my own structure. I let out a short breath through my nose and leaned back against the counter. That told me everything I needed to know about how far she thought she could push this. No hesitation, no doubt, just control. I picked up my keys and headed for the truck. If she wanted this on record, I was going to make sure everything else was too. The HOA office sat near the entrance to the subdivision, a clean building with trimmed hedges and a sign that read, like it meant something. I parked out front and walked in without knocking. Denise was behind her desk, exactly where she always was. Same posture, same controlled expression. She didn't look surprised to see me. "Mr. Walker," she said, "if you're here about the notices, everything is clearly outlined. You billed me." She blinked once, then leaned back slightly in her chair. "For services rendered, yes. The association incurred costs removing a non-compliant structure from your property. My property. Within HOA jurisdiction." "No," I said evenly. "Adjacent to it." Her smile tightened. "We've already been through this. Your land falls under the development's governing boundaries." "It doesn't." She reached for a file on her desk, flipping it open like she'd rehearsed this. "According to the plat map submitted during the subdivision's expansion. Have you seen the original survey?" That stopped her for half a second. "Just enough." She recovered quickly. "We rely on the most current documentation." "That's not what I asked." Silence stretched between us. Then she closed the file, slower this time. "If you have a dispute, you're welcome to submit it through proper channels. I tried to explain it to you." "You gave me a vague warning about a shed," she said, voice sharpening. "You never provided any documentation, any evidence. You didn't ask for any." Her jaw set. That structure violated HOA standards. End of discussion. I stepped closer to the desk, resting my hands on the edge of it. "You ever wonder why this place doesn't run on city water?" I asked. Her eyes flicked up to mine. "That's not relevant. It is, if you just destroyed the only system feeding it." That landed. Not fully. Not yet. But I saw it register somewhere behind her expression. Confusion. then dismissal. "You're making assumptions," she said. "The municipal supply doesn't connect here. That's not what our records show. Then your records are wrong." Her patience snapped right there. "I am not going to stand here and listen to another baseless claim from a homeowner who refused to comply with basic regulations," she said, voice rising just enough to carry. "If there is an issue with water infrastructure, the county will handle it. Not you." I straightened up. "Then I guess you'll be hearing from them soon." She laughed once, short and sharp. "You're trying to scare me." "No," I said. "I tried to warn you." I turned and walked out before she could respond. Behind me, I heard the chair shift, heard her pick up the phone, probably calling someone, probably making sure her version of events was the one that got recorded first. Didn't matter. The system was already down, and the first sign showed up faster than I expected. It was late afternoon when I heard it. Not a sound. A pattern. Sprinklers. They always kicked on around the same time, a staggered rhythm across the neighborhood. You could set a watch to it. Except now. One by one they clicked, and nothing followed. No pressure. No spray. Just dry mechanical ticks echoing across yards that had never gone without water before. I stepped off the porch and watched. A woman down the street walked out, frowning at her lawn, twisting the valve like it might fix itself. Another neighbor leaned over his system, tapping the control panel. Still nothing. Carl came up again, faster this time. "You seeing this?" he asked. I nodded. "Sprinklers aren't pulling anything," he said. "I thought it was just my line, but it's not just yours." He looked at me, eyes narrowing. "This is connected to what you were saying, isn't it?" I didn't answer right away. Across the street, someone turned on a hose. Air sputtered out. Then silence. Carl let out a slow breath. "Ethan, what did they do?" I met his eyes. "They shut it off." He shook his head. "No, they didn't shut anything off. They just tore down a shed." I held his gaze. That shed was the system. The words hung there, heavy, real. Carl looked past me toward the flattened ground where the structure used to stand, then back at the houses, then at the sprinklers that weren't working. "You're serious?" he said. "Yeah." A shout came from 2 houses down. "Hey, anyone else not getting water?" Another voice answered from across the street. "Yeah, mine just stopped." Carl turned slowly, taking it all in as it started to spread. One house, then 2, then more. "What happens now?" he asked quietly. I looked out over the neighborhood, watching people step outside, checking faucets, calling out to each other. Now they were asking questions. Finally. "They figure it out," I said. "And Denise?" I didn't take my eyes off the houses. "She's going to wish she had." By the next morning, it wasn't just sprinklers. It was kitchens, bathrooms, laundry rooms. I heard it before I saw it. Doors opening, voices carrying across the street. The sharp tone people use when something simple stops working, and they don't know why. "Water's out again. Mine too." "Is this a pressure issue?" I stood on the porch, watching it spread. Faucets turning, handles twisting. Nothing coming out but air and frustration. Carl was back before noon, quicker this time. No hesitation in his step. "It's not coming back on," he said. "I checked 3 houses down. Same thing." "I know. They're saying it's the city line." "It's not." He ran a hand over his face, looking out at the neighborhood like it had suddenly changed shape overnight. "You need to tell them, Ethan." I glanced at him. I tried. "That was before this." I shook my head. "Wouldn't matter." A car sped past, heading toward the HOA office. Another followed. People were moving now, looking for answers somewhere official. Carl exhaled hard. They're going to panic. They're already there. And right on cue, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I let it ring once, twice, then answered. This is Ethan. A pause. Then Denise's voice, tighter than I'd ever heard it. We need to talk. I leaned back against the porch railing. You had your chance. This isn't about the shed anymore. It never was. Another pause. I could hear something in the background. Voices, maybe more than one person in her office. There's a situation, she said carefully. Yeah, I replied. I noticed. The water supply has been disrupted. We're coordinating with the city to resolve it. They already told you they're not connected, didn't they? Silence. That was answer enough. Ethan, she said, dropping the formal tone, if you know something about this, now would be the time to share it. I let that sit for a second. You didn't want to hear it yesterday. This is different. No, I said. It's exactly the same. You just can't ignore it anymore. Her voice sharpened. People are affected. Families. You don't get to sit back and watch this escalate if you have information that could help. I looked out at the houses again. More people outside now. More voices. You made a decision without asking the right questions, I said. Now you get to live with the answers. You're being unreasonable. You tore down a system you didn't understand. That structure was in violation. That structure was keeping your entire subdivision running. Silence again. Longer this time. When she spoke, it was quieter, less certain. That's not possible. It is. You're telling me that one shed, I'm telling you, I cut in, you should have looked inside before you signed that order. I hung up before she could respond. Carl stared at me. You just left it at that? For now. He shook his head slowly. You're letting this play out. I'm letting the truth catch up. By afternoon, the HOA called an emergency meeting, not the usual scheduled kind with printed agendas and coffee in the corner. This one was rushed, disorganized, packed. I showed up late on purpose. The room was already full. Residents standing along the walls. Voices overlapping. Frustration pushing through every sentence. Denise stood at the front trying to keep control, but it wasn't working the way it had before. We are actively working with municipal authorities. They said it's not their system. A man near the front cut her off. My wife called them twice. They said we're not even on their grid. Another voice jumped in. Then where's our water coming from? Denise lifted a hand, trying to regain order. We are verifying all available infrastructure records. You should have done that before tearing something down, someone shouted from the back. That landed hard. I stepped into the room then, and a few heads turned. Not all. Not yet. Carl spotted me first and gave a slight nod. Denise saw it a second later. Her posture shifted. You, she said, pointing directly at me. If you have information relevant to this situation, you need to present it now. The room quieted just enough for that to carry. All eyes moved to me. I didn't rush forward, just walked steady, stopping near the edge of the group. You had information, I said. You chose not to hear it. This isn't about that anymore, she snapped. It is. A woman near the front stepped forward. Do you know what's going on or not? I looked at her, then at the rest of the room. They tore down the system feeding your water, I said. Murmurs spread instantly. That's not confirmed, Denise cut in. We have no verified. It is if you know where to look. Another voice. What system? I let the room sit in that question for a second, then answered. The one under that shed. The reaction was immediate. Confusion. Disbelief. A few people shaking their heads. "That doesn't make sense," someone said. "It was just a structure." "No," I said. "It wasn't." Denise stepped forward, voice rising. "You're making claims without evidence. This is exactly the kind of misinformation that—" "Check the lines." That stopped her. "Trace them," I continued. "Start at your houses, follow the pressure drop, see where it leads." Silence spread again, because that wasn't something she could argue with. It was something that could be proven. A man near the wall pulled out his phone. "I'm calling the county." "Already did," someone else said. "They're sending someone out." Denise's expression tightened, but there was something else there now. Doubt. Real doubt. "You should have done that before the vote," I said. She didn't respond. Because for the first time since I'd known her, she didn't have a clean answer ready. I turned and walked out before the noise picked back up, leaving them with the one thing they'd avoided from the start. Questions they couldn't ignore anymore. Behind me, voices rose again, louder, sharper, no longer aimed at me. They were turning, not fully, not yet, but the shift had started, and once it did, there wasn't any stopping it. By the time I got back to the ranch, the calls had already started stacking up. Not to me. To anyone who would answer. The HOA office, the county line, the city utility department. People dialing numbers they'd never needed before, trying to force a solution into existence. I didn't pick up my phone. Didn't need to. I already knew what they were hearing on the other end. "We're not connected." That was the answer. It always had been. The next morning, the bulldozer tracks were still fresh in the dirt, cutting across my land like a signature nobody could erase. The debris from the shed hadn't been cleared yet, just left there, flattened and exposed, like the aftermath didn't matter anymore. I walked out to it again, same as the day before, but this time, I wasn't the only one watching. 2 pickup trucks sat near the fence line, doors open, engines off. A couple of residents stood nearby, arms crossed, staring at the ground like it might explain something if they looked long enough. Carl was there too. He didn't wave this time, just nodded. "They're starting to connect it," he said quietly. I stepped up beside him. Took longer than I thought. One of the men turned toward me, mid-40s, tired expression. The kind of look you get when something basic stops working and nobody can tell you why. "You're Walker, right?" he asked. "Yeah." He glanced back at the wreckage. "You said this was connected to the water." "It was." Another man shook his head. "That doesn't make sense. There's no way one structure—" "It wasn't the structure," I said. "It was what was under it." Silence settled in. They didn't argue this time, didn't laugh, because now they had something to measure it against. Nothing. "You saying this whole place—" the first man started, then stopped. "All of it runs through here?" I met his eyes. Ran. That word landed harder than anything else I could have said. Carl shifted beside me. "County's sending engineers," he added. "Sheriff, too." I nodded once. "Good." The first man exhaled slowly. "Then they'll figure it out." "Yeah," I said. "They will." They showed up just before noon. Sheriff Cole Bennett stepped out of his truck first, scanning the property with that same measured look he always had. Not rushed, not reactive, just taking everything in before saying a word. Behind him, a county vehicle pulled up. 2 engineers got out, carrying equipment cases and tablets, already talking to each other in low, focused voices. Denise arrived last. Different car this time. No SUV, no slow entrance. She stepped out fast, sunglasses off, face tighter than I'd ever seen it. Whatever confidence she'd been carrying yesterday, it wasn't there anymore. "Sheriff," she said, walking straight toward him, "we've got a serious infrastructure failure affecting the entire subdivision." Bennett didn't respond right away, just looked past her at the debris. "What happened here?" he asked. Denise hesitated. "Just a fraction. An HOA-approved demolition," she said. "Non-compliant structure." One of the engineers glanced up at that, then back at the ground. Bennett's eyes shifted to me. "Mr. Walker?" "Sheriff, you were present when this was removed?" "I was." "And you raised concerns?" "I did." Denise cut in. "There were no formal objections submitted through proper channels." "I spoke to you directly," I said, not taking my eyes off Bennett. "That's not the same as—" Bennett raised a hand. "That's enough." Silence snapped into place. He stepped forward, boots crunching over broken wood, as he moved into what was left of the shed. The engineers followed, already crouching, clearing sections of debris, exposing what had been buried. It didn't take long. One of them brushed aside a layer of dirt and stopped. "There," he said. The other moved in beside him, pulling out a small toolkit, working quickly. Metal piping. Crushed, bent inward where the blade had hit it. "Pressure line," the first engineer said. The second nodded. "And not small scale." They kept digging. More lines, more connections. Then the housing unit, what was left of it, flattened under debris, wiring exposed, casing split open. The first engineer stood up slowly, looking around the property, then back toward the neighborhood. "Where's your main feed?" he asked Denise. She blinked. "The city supply." He shook his head immediately. "No, not the municipal line. Your actual feed." She didn't answer, because she didn't know. He turned to Bennett. "We're going to need to trace this." "Do it," Bennett said. The second engineer was already pulling up something on his tablet. Maps, overlays, old data sets. "Pressure dropped across the entire subdivision?" he asked. Carl stepped forward. "All of it. Every house." The engineer nodded, tapping through layers of information. "Then this is your origin point," he said, gesturing toward the ground. Denise stepped closer, voice tight. "That's not possible. This was a private structure on a single property." "It's not about the structure," the engineer said, cutting her off. "It's about what it was connected to." He turned the tablet toward her. "Your entire subdivision is pulling from a private well system," he said. "And based on what we're seeing," he looked back at the crushed lines, "you just destroyed it." Silence. Total. Even the people along the fence stopped moving. Denise stared at the screen, then at the ground, then back at the engineer like the answer might change if she looked at it long enough. "That's not—" she started. But there was nothing to finish that sentence with. Because for the first time, she was looking at proof. Bennett stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "Ms. Halbrook," he said, "we're going to need all documentation related to this decision. Meeting records, property surveys, any agreements tied to this land." She didn't respond, didn't move, just stood there, staring at what was left of the system she'd ordered destroyed. I stayed where I was, didn't step in, didn't say anything. Because this part didn't need me anymore. The truth was already doing the work, and it had just started. It didn't take long for it to spread. By that evening, the entire subdivision was out. Not just sprinklers, not just hoses, everything. Faucets hissed dry air, toilets wouldn't refill, water heaters clicked uselessly, trying to cycle with nothing feeding them. People who had never thought twice about turning a handle were suddenly standing there, staring at nothing. The calls got louder, angrier, this time not directed at the city, at the HOA. I didn't need to go looking for it. The noise carried all the way to the edge of my property. Voices raised near the entrance, car doors slamming, someone shouting Denise's name like she owed them an answer she didn't have. Carl showed up again just after dark. "They're lining up at the office," he said. "Half the neighborhood's there, demanding explanations." "And?" He shook his head. "She's still blaming the city." I leaned against the porch railing. "That won't hold." "No," he said. "It won't." We stood there for a second, listening to the distant noise. "You could stop this," Carl added. I looked at him. "Could I?" He hesitated. "You know how it works. You've been running it for years. Running it doesn't mean I can restart it." That landed. Carl frowned. "What do you mean?" I pushed off the railing and stepped down onto the gravel. "That pump was a continuous system," I said. "Pressure balanced, calibrated. Everything had to be aligned." I gestured toward the debris out back. "They didn't just damage it. They crushed it." Carl let out a slow breath. "So there's no quick fix?" "No." "How long?" I met his eyes. "Depends how fast they admit what they did." By morning, it wasn't just frustration. It was panic. Cars started leaving the neighborhood early. People heading out with empty containers, coolers, anything they could fill somewhere else. I saw trucks loaded with bottled water coming back in, stacks already running low before noon. Someone had taped a handwritten sign near the HOA entrance. "No water. Need answers." Another sign appeared under it an hour later. "Call the county." Denise's office stayed open, but the tone inside changed. No more controlled meetings. No more structured updates. Now it was reaction. People talking over each other. Demands instead of questions. I didn't need to, because by midday the county came back, and this time they didn't come alone. 3 vehicles pulled up just past the HOA office. County engineers again. More equipment this time. And behind them, a second unit. State level. That got people's attention. Carl called me from down the road. "They're back," he said. "And they're not messing around this time." I figured. They're asking for access to the entire line grid. Every house. Every connection point. That's what it's going to take. He paused. "You coming?" I looked out toward the subdivision, then back at the land behind me. "Yeah," I said. "I'll be there." The atmosphere was different when I arrived. Quieter, not calmer, heavier. People stepped aside when I walked up. Not out of respect, not yet. Out of recognition. They were starting to connect the dots. Denise stood near the front, talking to one of the engineers, her voice low but tight. "There has to be a secondary source," she was saying. "A backup line. Something we're missing." The engineer didn't look convinced. "We've checked the municipal feeds," he said. "You're not tied into them. Not directly. That's not possible. It is if the development was built on private infrastructure." She shook her head. "That would have been disclosed." "Not necessarily," he said. "Not if it was handled through land agreements instead of public utility filings." That was when she saw me. Her posture stiffened immediately. "You," she said, stepping forward. "You've been withholding information." I didn't stop walking. "I told you what you needed to know. You made vague statements. You never provided documentation. You never asked for it." Her jaw tightened. "People are suffering because of this." I stopped a few feet from her. "People are suffering because you made a decision without understanding what you were removing. That's not..." It is. The engineer stepped in before she could escalate further. Do you have documentation? He asked me directly. I nodded once. Deed records. Original system layout. Maintenance logs. His expression shifted immediately. We need to see that. You will, I said. But not out here. Denise stepped forward. Anything related to this development falls under HOA authority. No, I said, cutting her off. It doesn't. She opened her mouth to respond, but the engineer raised a hand. If he has original documentation tied to the infrastructure, we need to review it before making any assumptions. Denise looked like she wanted to argue, but she didn't, because she didn't have anything stronger to stand on. Not anymore. We moved to the HOA office. Small conference room. Too many people inside it. Too much tension for the space to hold. I laid the folder on the table. Didn't rush it. Didn't explain it right away. Just opened it and turned it toward them. Old paper. Signatures. Dates that went back further than most of the houses in that subdivision. The engineer leaned in first. Then the second one. They didn't speak at first. Just read. Page by page. Line by line. I watched their expressions change. From curiosity to focus to something heavier. Here, one of them said, tapping a section. The other nodded. Protected infrastructure clause, he murmured. Non-removal condition. Denise stepped closer. What does that mean? Neither of them answered immediately. They kept reading. Then one of them looked up at her. It means, he said slowly, that structure wasn't optional. Silence filled the room. He tapped the page again. It was required. Denise's face went still. What do you mean required? I mean, he said, your association was legally obligated to maintain and protect that system. He slid the paper across the table toward her. And based on this, he glanced back at me. It was never yours to remove. That was the moment it shifted. Not just in the room, in everything. Denise looked down at the document like it might change if she stared hard enough. It didn't. Carl, standing near the wall, let out a breath he'd probably been holding since the day before. Someone behind me whispered, "Oh, no." And for the first time since this started, nobody was asking questions anymore. They already knew the answer. They just didn't know what it was going to cost them. No one spoke for a few seconds after the engineer said it. The kind of silence that settles in when something shifts from a mistake to a liability. Denise was still staring at the document, her fingers resting lightly on the edge of the page like she was afraid to touch it fully. That doesn't make sense, she said finally. If this was binding, why wasn't it disclosed to the board? The engineer didn't look up from the paperwork. It was filed with the county. That's not the same as... It is, he said, cutting her off. Legally, it is. Sheriff Bennett stepped forward, picking up the document and scanning it himself. His expression didn't change much, but I could see the focus sharpen behind his eyes. Walker, he said, this your father's signature? Yeah. And this system's been running continuously since then? Yes, sir. Maintained by you? I nodded. He looked back down at the page, then at the engineers. Walk me through it, he said. One of them stepped forward, pulling up the map on his tablet again. This time he turned it so everyone could see. Every home in this subdivision, he said, tracing lines across the screen, feeds off a single private well source. It originates here. His finger stopped on my land. From there, it branches out through a distribution network, pressure regulated, filtered, and routed underground. Carl leaned in closer, eyes narrowing. All of it? All of it, the engineer confirmed. There's no secondary source, no backup system. A murmur spread through the room. Denise looked up sharply. That's not possible. Developments are required to have redundancy. Not if the original infrastructure predates current code, the second engineer said. And based on these filings, he tapped the document. This system was grandfathered in. Denise's composure slipped again. So you're saying, she said slowly, that one private system has been supplying water to hundreds of homes without oversight? The first engineer met her gaze. I'm saying it's been supplying water without interruption. That landed harder, because everyone in that room knew what uninterrupted meant. Reliable, stable, working. Until now. Sheriff Bennett set the document back down on the table. Let's be clear, he said, voice steady. This structure was legally protected. Its removal violated that agreement. No one argued. No one could. And the result of that removal, he continued, is a full loss of water access across this subdivision. Again, silence. He turned to Denise. Who authorized the demolition? She opened her mouth, then hesitated. The board voted, she said. It was a collective decision. I asked who authorized it, Bennett repeated. Her eyes flicked around the room. Board members who had been sitting quietly along the wall suddenly found something else to look at. I signed the final approval, she said. Based on what documentation? Our internal compliance review, which did not include this agreement. She didn't answer, because there wasn't an answer that worked. One of the engineers stepped back, pulling up another screen. We need to trace the full extent of the damage, he said. Not just the main feed. Pressure regulators, filtration units, everything that was housed under that structure is gone. How long to rebuild? Someone asked from the back. The engineer didn't soften it. Months. That word hit like a weight. Minimum, he added, assuming immediate approval, funding, and no permitting delays. Months? A woman repeated. We don't have water now. I understand that, he said. But this isn't a simple repair. This is a full system reconstruction. Another voice cut in. What about temporary solutions? Tankers? Emergency supply? Possible, the engineer said, but limited and expensive. All eyes turned, slowly, back toward Denise. She felt it. You could see it in the way her shoulders tightened, the way her grip on the clipboard shifted. This isn't, she started, then stopped. The association can coordinate interim support. With what funds? Someone asked. No answer. Because now the numbers were starting to take shape. Emergency supply. System rebuild. Legal exposure. It wasn't just a mistake anymore. It was a cost. Sheriff Bennett stepped forward again, his tone shifting slightly. From this point on, this is no longer just an HOA matter, he said. We're dealing with potential destruction of critical infrastructure and breach of a legally binding agreement. He looked at Denise directly. I'm going to need a full record of communications leading up to that decision. Emails, meeting minutes, internal discussions. Her lips parted slightly. That's internal HOA documentation. It's now part of an active investigation. That ended the argument. I stayed where I was, leaning back slightly against the wall, watching it all unfold. No need to step in. No need to push. The system was doing exactly what it was supposed to do. Not the water system. The other one. The legal one. Piece by piece, everything was being laid out. Cause, action, consequence. Carl moved closer to me, lowering his voice. You knew it would hit like this, he said. I knew it wouldn't stay quiet. He nodded slowly. You going to fix it? I looked at him, not without terms. He studied me for a second, then glanced back toward the table where the engineers were still reviewing the documents. They're going to need you, he said. I know, and Denise? I followed his gaze. She was standing off to the side now, no longer leading, no longer directing anything, just listening, watching control slip out of her hands one piece at a time. She's already lost it, I said. Carl didn't argue, because he could see it too. The engineer looked up again, this time directly at me. Mr. Walker, he said, we're going to need your cooperation moving forward. System specs, maintenance history, access points, everything. You'll have it, I said. Good, he replied, because right now, he glanced around the room, at the residents, at the board, at Denise. You're the only one who understands how this actually works. That was the shift. Clear, final. Control had moved, not loudly, not dramatically, but completely. And for the first time since this started, they knew exactly who they needed. They just didn't know yet what it was going to cost them to ask. The room didn't clear out right away. Nobody wanted to be the first one to leave. Because walking out meant accepting what had just been said, that the problem wasn't temporary. It wasn't external. It wasn't fixable with a phone call or a service ticket. It was something they had done, and something they couldn't undo. Denise was the last one to move. She gathered her papers slowly, stacking them like control could be rebuilt if she stayed organized enough. But her hands weren't steady anymore. Not like before. Ethan, she said finally. I didn't turn right away. Walk with me. That was new. No authority in it. No assumption I'd follow. Just a request. I stepped outside with her anyway. The parking lot was quieter than it had been all day. Most people had gone back to their houses, back to empty sinks and dry pipes. Denise stopped near the edge of the curb, arms crossed tight. You knew this would happen, she said. I knew what that system did. You could have made it clearer. I tried. She exhaled sharply, looking out toward the neighborhood. You gave me a warning. You didn't give me documentation. You didn't ask for it. That's not how this works, she snapped. If something is critical infrastructure, it needs to be disclosed, registered, documented properly. It was. She turned back to me. Not with the HOA. That's because it's not yours. That hit harder now than it had before. She didn't argue it this time, because she'd already seen the clause, already heard the engineers, already felt the shift. You let it happen, she said, voice lower now. You stood there and watched it get destroyed. I met her eyes. You didn't give me a reason not to. Silence. A long one. She looked away first. That system, she said slowly. How long has it been running? Since before your subdivision existed. And you maintained it alone? Yes. No compensation? No. She shook her head slightly, like the idea didn't fit into her version of how things worked. That's not sustainable. It was. Until now. I didn't respond to that. Because that part was obvious. Back inside, the engineers had spread out more documents across the table. Sheriff Bennett was reviewing a second set of files now, county records pulled during the meeting. Here, one of the engineers said, tapping a page. Original development agreement. Bennett leaned in. The engineer read it aloud. Private landowner agrees to provide water access via independent well system. In exchange, development entity agrees to preserve and protect infrastructure in perpetuity. He paused, including housing structure, access points, and maintenance clearance. Denise stepped back into the room just as he finished. In perpetuity? She repeated. That means forever, the engineer said. No expiration, no override clause. That's not enforceable, she said quickly. Not without periodic renewal. It is if it's tied to land use rights and recorded with the county, he replied. Bennett looked up at her. Which it is. She went quiet again. Carl shifted near the wall, looking between the documents and the engineers. So what happens now? He asked. The second engineer answered this time. Now we assess damage, estimate rebuild cost, and determine liability. That's going to be the HOA, someone muttered. Denise's head snapped toward the voice. It was a board decision. It was your decision, Carl said, stepping forward. She stared at him. You voted too. Carl didn't back down. I hesitated. You raised your hand. And you pushed it through, he shot back. You controlled the presentation. You shut him down when he tried to explain. The room tightened again. This time, not around me. Around her. Bennett closed the file and set it down. Based on what we've seen so far, he said, this falls under negligent destruction of protected infrastructure. Denise swallowed. That's a legal classification, she said. Yes, he replied. It is. And what does that mean? It means this is no longer a civil disagreement. Another pause. It's a liability case, he added. One of the engineers flipped to another page. Rebuild estimate, he said quietly. Everyone leaned in. He didn't soften it. Full system replacement, including drilling, filtration, distribution, and housing structure. He looked up. You're looking at several $1 million. The reaction was immediate. Shock. Disbelief. A few quiet curses under people's breath. Denise didn't say anything, didn't move, just stared at the number like it wasn't real. And that's before temporary supply costs, the engineer continued. Water hauling, emergency infrastructure, compliance measures. He let that trail off. Didn't need to finish it. Everyone understood. This wasn't just expensive. It was crushing. I stayed where I was. Didn't step forward, didn't push. Because the truth didn't need help anymore. It was already heavier than anything I could have added. Denise finally spoke again, voice barely controlled. There has to be coverage for something like this. Insurance? Won't apply, Bennett said. She turned sharply. Why not? Because this wasn't accidental damage. It was a mistake. It was an authorized action, he corrected. Approved, documented, and executed without due diligence. The words landed clean, final. No coverage, he repeated. That was the moment it broke. Not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet collapse behind her eyes. Control, authority, confidence. Gone. Carl looked over at me again. You're still the only one who knows how to rebuild it, he said. I didn't answer. Because that part wasn't the question anymore. The question was what came next. And as I stood there, watching the weight of it settle across that room, I realized something simple. They hadn't just lost water. They'd lost leverage. And they didn't even know how to ask for it back yet. It didn't take long for someone else to figure it out for them. Lawyers always do. The first one showed up before the end of the day. Not loud, not aggressive. Just a man in a pressed shirt stepping into the HOA office with a folder already in his hand, asking for documentation like he knew exactly what he was walking into. By the next morning, there were 3 more. Different firms, different clients, same questions, same direction. I didn't go looking for updates. They came to me. Carl again, this time with something heavier in his voice. They're filing, he said. Who? Everyone, he replied. Homeowners. At least a few dozen already. More talking about it. For what? He let out a short breath. Loss of essential services. Property impact. Negligence. I nodded once. Makes sense. Carl looked at me carefully. They're naming the HOA. They should. And Denise. That didn't surprise me. Personally, he added, that mattered. By afternoon, the tone around the neighborhood had changed again. No more confusion. No more denial. Now it was accountability. People weren't asking what happened anymore. They were asking who was responsible. I drove past the HOA office once, slow enough to see inside. Denise was still there, but she wasn't standing at the front anymore. She was sitting, talking to someone across the desk, not directing, not leading, explaining. And from the way her hands moved, not very convincingly. The next shift came from the insurance side. Fast. Too fast. Carl called me again, voice tight. They denied it. Denied what? The claim, he said. HOA insurance. They're not covering any of it. That tracked. Why? I asked, even though I already knew. Intentional action, he said. That's what they're calling it. Said the demolition was approved without proper verification, so it falls outside coverage. I leaned back in my seat. That was the worst-case scenario for them. No safety net. No fallback. Just exposure. By evening, the board started to fracture. It didn't happen all at once. Just small cracks at first. One member stopped answering calls. Another sent out a statement distancing himself from the decision. Carl showed me a screenshot. I trusted the information presented at the time. I was not aware of any protected infrastructure. I regret supporting the motion. I read it once, then handed the phone back. They're trying to step away, he said. They're too late. The real damage came from inside. Emails, messages, internal discussions that were never meant to leave that room. Now they were being pulled into the open, subpoenaed, reviewed, shared. Carl showed me one of them, sent from Denise to the board a week before the demolition. I read it slowly. Walker is exaggerating. He's trying to delay compliance. We should move forward before he creates more complications. Another line below it. This is a simple removal. Nothing critical. I handed the phone back without saying anything. Didn't need to. The words spoke for themselves. The next day, Sheriff Bennett returned. This time, not just as an observer. He came with paperwork, formal, structured, the kind that changes how people stand in a room. Denise met him at the door. I wasn't inside, but I could see enough through the glass. Her posture, his stance, the exchange, controlled, measured, final. Carl filled in the rest later. He requested full cooperation, he said. All communications, all approvals, everything tied to that decision. And? She didn't have a choice. By then, the pressure wasn't just legal. It was personal. Neighbors stopped talking to her, stopped backing her up, stopped pretending this was just a bad situation. Now it had a name, and it was hers. I saw her once that afternoon, not at the office, at her house. Standing near the driveway, phone pressed to her ear, pacing like she could walk her way out of it. She saw my truck as I passed. For a second, she looked like she might wave me down. Then she didn't, because she knew. There wasn't anything left to say that would change where this was going. Carl leaned against my fence later that evening, quieter than usual. She's done, he said. Yeah, board's falling apart. 2 already resigned. More will. He nodded. They're saying you're the only one who can fix it. I didn't answer right away, because that wasn't the real question anymore. They want you to help, he added. I looked out over the land, toward the empty system that used to run beneath it. They didn't want help, I said. They wanted control. Carl didn't argue that. Now they've got neither, he said. Night settled in, and the neighborhood stayed darker than usual. No sprinklers, no outside water systems humming, just stillness and the weight of what was coming. Because this part? This wasn't the fallout. This was the setup, the point where everything lined up. Evidence, decisions, responsibility, all of it moving toward one place. And when it got there, it wasn't going to be quiet anymore. The first formal notice went out 3 days later, not from the HOA, from the county. A cease and compliance order, typed, stamped, and delivered to every board member still holding a position. It outlined everything in clear terms: unauthorized destruction, violation of recorded land agreements, disruption of essential services. No interpretation, no room to argue, just facts. By then, Denise wasn't answering her phone anymore. The next shift came faster than anyone expected. City officials got involved. Not because the HOA asked, because the situation had escalated beyond them. A temporary water supply was brought in. Tankers, emergency hookups, controlled distribution points. It wasn't enough to restore normal life, but it kept things from getting worse. And every gallon came with a cost that now had somewhere to land. I got the call that afternoon. Different tone this time. Measured. Professional. Mr. Walker, this is the County Utilities Office. We'd like to discuss a path forward. I let the silence sit for a second before answering. I'm listening. We're prepared to rebuild the system, the voice said. Full reconstruction, modernized infrastructure, long-term oversight. And control? A pause. Transferred to the municipality. That was the right answer, but not the only one. And the HOA? I asked. They would have no authority over the system moving forward. I nodded to myself. That's a start. The meeting happened the next morning, not at the HOA office, at the site, where the shed used to stand, where everything had started. County officials, engineers, a few remaining board members, and residents. More of them this time, quieter, watching instead of talking. Denise was there, but she wasn't standing at the front. She stayed near the back, arms crossed, saying nothing. No one asked her to speak. No one looked to her for direction. The lead engineer stepped forward, laying out the plan. Full rebuild, he said. New housing structure, reinforced. Updated pump system, redundant filtration, backup generators. He pointed toward the ground. All of it tied into the existing distribution network, which remains largely intact. Carl stood beside me, listening. They're rebuilding it better, he said quietly. They have to. The engineer continued. Estimated timeline, several months for full restoration. Temporary supply remains active until completion. A murmur moved through the crowd. Not relief. Not yet. Just acceptance. Then the county official stepped in. We've reached a preliminary agreement with Mr. Walker regarding land access and system placement. That got attention. All eyes turned. I didn't step forward. Didn't need to. He continued. The system will be reclassified as protected municipal infrastructure. Ownership of the land remains with Mr. Walker. Operational control transfers to the county. A pause. And per his condition, he glanced at me briefly. The Homeowners Association will have no authority over the system, now or in the future. That landed clean. Final. No debate, no vote, just a change in control. Someone near the front asked it. What about the cost? The official didn't hesitate. The association is liable for damages resulting from the demolition. Legal proceedings are ongoing. No one asked anything after that. Denise finally moved, just one step forward, then stopped, like she was about to say something, then didn't, because there wasn't anything left that would help her. Over the next few weeks, it all unraveled exactly the way it was supposed to. Board members resigned one by one. Statements went out. Distancing. Excuses. Too late. The lawsuits moved forward. Numbers attached to every decision that had been made too quickly. Insurance stayed out of it, just like I knew they would. Denise lasted longer than the others, but not by much. The vote to remove her didn't take long. No resistance, no support, just silence and raised hands, the same way the demolition had been approved. Only this time, people knew what they were agreeing to. I saw the moving truck a few days later, parked outside her house. Boxes stacked near the door. No one helping, no one watching for long. She came out once, carrying a small box, pausing near the steps like she was trying to decide if she should look back. She didn't, just set it down and kept moving. The rebuild started within the month. New structure, clean lines, reinforced materials. Nothing like the old shed, but in the same place, on the same ground, connected to the same lines. The first time the system came back online, I was there. Not for the officials, not for the residents, just for the system. I walked into the new structure, listening. The hum came back. Different. Stronger. But steady. Pressure gauges held. Flow stabilized. Everything working the way it was supposed to. Carl showed up later that day. "You hear it?" he asked. "Yeah." He nodded. "Whole neighborhood's talking about it." I figured. He leaned against the doorframe. "They're putting up a plaque." I didn't look at him. They don't need to. They want to. That's different. He smiled slightly. "You're still going to come out here every morning, aren't you?" "Yeah. Same routine. Same system." He nodded once, just with people finally paying attention. Before I left, I walked over to the shelf near the entrance, set the brass key down. Same one I'd pulled out of the wreckage. Didn't need it anymore. Not the same way. But I left it there anyway. Water ran again, across all 438 homes. Steady, reliable, like it had for years. Only difference now was that everyone understood what it took to keep it that way. And no one ever called it just a shed again.
Sometimes the things that made the most are the ones nobody bothered to understand. Until they gone, the old shed wasn't impressive, it wasn't pretty, and it didn't draw attention. But it carried responsibility, history, and a system that quietly held everything together. What this all comes down to is simple. Before you try to control something, you better take the time to understand it. Because once it's gone, you don't always get a second chance to fix what you broke. Out here, people don't earn respect by talking loud or making rules. They earn it by showing up, doing the work, and taking care of what's being trusted to them. Let's teach you that. So does time. And sometimes the hardest lessons are the ones that come after things fall apart. If you ever deal with an HOA or seen someone push too far without knowing the full story, drop a 1 in the comments. And if you believe in standing your ground the right way, quiet, steady, and backed by the truth, type yes. And if stories like this mean something to you, real ones about land, religion, and doing things the right way, go ahead and subscribe. There's more coming.